Ladies and gents, welcome back. We're still in the middle of this Alberta election, and we're getting very close to the date. And again, for another roundup and follow-up for what's happening in this election, brought in Marty Up North. Marty, welcome, and thanks for coming back.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, we're down to less than 2 weeks now. I mean, today's Wednesday, and the election's on Monday the 29th, so 12 days from now.
Wow, it's getting close. And well, what are the polls looking like? What are people saying? Because I saw you put on Twitter some weird anomalies that are happening in the polling.
Yeah, there was a dip. It looked like it actually had me worried because it was going into the weekend on Friday. It suddenly looked like the polls had flipped, and Rachel had suddenly taken a lead. And I was racking my brains trying to figure out what had done that. Like, was it Danielle's Nazi comparison? Did that score a point? And I couldn't see anything that scored the point enough to flip, you know? I mean, when I'm looking at polls, I'm looking at like day after day. So if you're always in, you know, the 55%, 55, to suddenly go to 44 looks very unusual. But it can happen. I mean, it happened in the federal election a few years ago when, you know, Mariam Monsef made that weird comment about the Taliban being our brothers. And then that just flipped it for the Liberals for several weeks.
Then they brought it back. That's what you're calling the bozo eruption.
Oh, speaking of, actually, a good follow-up from last week. I did think of some bozo eruptions. So I looked it up again. Bozo eruptions are common in it's a Canadian political term. Mm-hmm. They're common in Alberta. And loosely speaking, it's when a politician says the truth. So a good example of a bozo eruption is a politician pleading with Canadians saying, we all have to, you know, let's say somebody says we all have to do our part to cut costs. Look at my wife, for instance, she's driving a Cadillac. So when a politician says something like that, you just go, huh, really? Okay. So that's, you know, and the Chrystia Freeland example on Disney was an example. But anyways,
fair enough.
I digress.
But yeah, so we had a bounce back on that poll. It flipped right back. Yeah. UCP jumped right back up into the majority again at the end of that.
And I think it's going to stay like that. You know, we talked about it. I mean, I did a breakdown. So for the listeners, there's 87 seats in Alberta up for grabs. 40 of them are rural ridings. And of the rural ridings right now, the polls are saying that 39 out of the 40 are going to the Conservative. The only one that's not appears to be Banff, Canmore, that part of the world.
Right.
I'm a rural
Albertan. Snowboarders and whatnot.
Absolutely. And I'm a rural Albertan, so I believe that. I believe those 40. And so just on those 40, that's almost enough for a majority. Then there's 21 in Edmonton, in and around Edmonton. And right now, out of those 21, we're going to say that 19 of them are Rachel Notley's. Edmonton's our capital. It's the civil servants, the academics, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So Rachel has that. So 2 there. So Danielle has 39 rurals and 2. Then there's 26 up for grab in Calgary. And even so, you know, for Danielle to get a majority, she needs about 6 in Calgary. She's probably going to get a dozen, maybe 13 or something like that. So the data makes sense. It's intuitively makes sense. It makes sense from what I'm hearing on the ground from talking to people.
Right. So they're going to have a debate coming up real soon. Is that tomorrow?
That's tomorrow. Yeah, that's tomorrow. So, that's going to be interesting because right now, you know, I think it's common in an election that the politicians sort of avoid each other, right? They don't both show up in Calgary or Red Deer or whatever. They focus on different areas and try to avoid each other. But tomorrow is the debate. Now, I should notice, I think it's in Edmonton. It might be in Red Deer. And but the politicians have been avoiding each other. So Danielle and Rachel have not been in the same town. But for me as an observer, I would say right now that both parties are actually keeping a tight rein on the visuals and keeping the Conservatives are keeping Danielle a little bit away from the camera. They can use the excuse that she's busy with the forest fires. And then the NDP have their reasons, but they're not in our face as much as you would expect them. And I think that's like what we said last week. They're both playing each other like a two prize fighters to see who makes the first mistake. So they're cautious right now. So tomorrow, when they're face to face on the stage, I think that's going to be one of the best debates we've had in a long time, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it. And, well, Danielle Smith isn't.
And then there's other people on the stage. There's going to be two other people on the stage. But
nobody's going to care. I don't think.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to care much about that. But Danielle Smith isn't the only one that Rachel Notley's been trying to avoid lately. She's been trying to avoid journalists. And I did a report the other day about how Cian Bexte was actually arrested and charged with trespassing at an event that she was holding.
Yeah. What was the name of that business? That business was an interesting business. It's a clothing business somewhere in Edmonton that makes, their motto is clothing is political, which I find an interesting tagline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's a question for maybe you, or maybe you asked that you did a story on that one a little bit. But I think Rachel is hiding by going to these private events. She's not going to libraries and places where almost anybody can show up. She's doing all her press releases and her events in very, very private settings like that business. And I think it's on purpose to control who shows up.
Well, and this is why I had I had a bunch of pushback and people saying, from the left saying, well, this isn't fair. The detail you left out was that this was a private venue. Well, what they're leaving out is that this is a public election. And if you're going to have a public candidate and you're going to have a public venue inside your private business, and you have a public announcement that the media is welcome, well, you can't just then say, well, we don't allow this media or that media. Then it gets into a question of, well, how do you define media? Who gets the license to be media? And then we're just up shit's creek, really.
And that's a card that I find the left plays more often than the right. The left likes to use the unaccredited media, specifically talking about groups like, is that my wife that's behind me? Hi, Karen. But so that was Rachel's excuse, right? Is that it was a private event or open to the media, and that Keenan, is it Keenan?
It's Cian. And she said said that he's not a journalist, he's an activist, and she kept associating him with activism and not journalism.
He's a journalist as much as you are, as much as I am some days. I mean, if you're reporting on an event like that, then you're a journalist. I mean, that's my definition anyways. He should have been there. And in fact, he was at an event afterwards. Brian Jean had a small event. Well, that's another thing altogether. Actually, we'll get to that one. But Brian Jean had an event, and Brian Jean, former leader himself, was taking on some questions. He took on a question from Cian, and then just laughingly at the end of his question, he's like, "Oh, good to see you here, Cian, by the way." So he answered and he acknowledged Cian. But that's something else I wanted to say. The media is not covering the few events that there are. So Cian, in fact, mentioned that today. He was at an event at a MLA. I can't remember who, and he said there was 2 journalists there. So the journalists are just not covering it closely. They're not covering the UCP campaign. They're definitely giving a lot of positive spotlight to Rachel, but definitely, and that's a function of the incumbent. I mean, I can't.
That talks a little bit about the fairness, and where that kind of segues into is the fairness that's happening now. We're seeing as the unions have been backing off from funding essentially this election. Can you tell me about that?
They got called out. So people started calling them out before, informally. So as an example, the campaign hadn't formally kicked off, and we were seeing a lot of advertising everywhere, on YouTube, on billboards and things like that. And then during the campaign in the last 2 weeks, it's a lot of Albertans are mentioning that it looks like the NDP have a much bigger war chest for advertising and stuff like that. And we all kind of knew that it is, that the unions are in the back pocket of the NDP, or vice versa, that the NDP is in the back pocket of the union. But formally last week, the UCP launched a complaint with the Alberta elections, alleging that some of the unions were going beyond what's allowed in the law and funding the NDP disproportionately or beyond what they should be doing. And then we immediately noticed, and I mean immediately here as an Albertan, we noticed the radio ads, the YouTube ads, all of that suddenly toned down. And then people have been quick to take screenshots and show, on the NDP websites where they list their campaign management. They had, Gil, what's Gil's? They had union members listed there as in their campaign office. So they started scrubbing all of that. And now when you go to those pages, it's left as vacant. Yeah, like they literally had union members in their campaign organization, like formally on paper as part of their campaign.
And we all know that Rachel Notley's husband is pretty high up in the public sector union as well. So this is
Lou Arab's his name. He's in communications with the not QP. No. Oh God! Now I'm having
QP is what I understood. Yeah, it was QP.
I think he is in QP. He's a communications director in QP, which I don't care that that puts him in a conflict of interest. Now people say he should quit, but if he quits, he'll still act in that role. I'm like, I'm sure he will. It'd be like I guess I could in an informal capacity do that, but it's the principle. On principle, he should step down or at least during the campaign, at least. Well, not even when she's he should step down once his wife Rachel got elected as an MLA. That's my opinion.
It should have been some time ago, actually.
Yeah.
All right, Marty. So we're going to check in again with you every week until the election happens. So anything else to add before we end this one?
Yeah, same as last week. Boring campaign so far. Very few promises. Rachel's big promise today or yesterday was to cut small business tax, which is great. Everybody loves a tax break. We're surprised to hear her say that. But then hidden in her documents, she's increasing taxes on other businesses from 8 to 11%, which is a huge jump.
Yeah.
Danielle, maybe we can talk about it more next week when we've had time to digest it. But one of the issues on the safe consumption sites and stuff like that, and some people, she made an announcement sort of regarding that, saying that she would pass a law that would enable family cops, judges to force a serious drug addict into rehabilitation. So that was her big announcement this week. But again, no earth-shattering promises, announcement. The NDP are about taxes and healthcare, and Danielle is about lowering taxes and security and drug addiction. Like nothing. A bit of a boring election, to be honest. So let's look forward to tomorrow. I guess tomorrow's going to be fat. I'm sure you'll have a great show on that one after the debate. But
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to having you back next week, Marty. Where can everybody find you?
Marty Up North on YouTube or Marty Up North on Twitter.
Perfect. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Cheers.